It's great to be back in Springfield. Thank you for your time this morning. We're going to be here, I'll be here for 2 days before going to Washington, D.C. on Thursday. Primarily focused on meeting with members of the General Assembly. We're well into the process of meeting with every member of the Senate as well as the House. My goal is to get to know everybody personally on a first-name basis over time, get to know them and their goals and personal priorities and work style. I want to get to know everybody well and develop a good working partnership and a good working relationship. Our problems are significant. We got into these problems on a bipartisan basis, and we need to get out of them on a bipartisan basis. And my goal is to work collegially, collectively together on bipartisan solutions to restore the prosperity and the growth here in Illinois. As well as meeting with the General Assembly members on a get-to-know-you process. We're also very focused in meeting with financial executives inside the government who are really focusing on the budget challenges and the fiscal issues that we'll be facing here in the state. As we talked about last time with many of you that I was here, our financial condition here in Illinois is dire. It's very bad. Worse than has been reported, worse than has been discussed publicly. And every time we look under the hood and look in different departments, look in different issues, the problems, the deficits, the overspending is more significant than has been discussed in the past. So we're getting to the bottom of that right now. We want to make sure we understand it. And we begin the process of explaining to the voters and explaining to the taxpayers what's gone on so they can understand the issues and challenges so together we can come up with bipartisan solutions to fix the problems. Unfortunately, Governor Quinn signed a budget that was broken. It was not honest. It was a phony budget. It was not balanced, even close to balanced. And there's been a lot of accounting gimmicks and borrowing to create what had the appearance of somewhat close to balanced budget, and the deficit is far worse than has been discussed. And so we're getting into the hard facts on the budget right now with the experts inside the government and to understand the real detail. What we found is that Governor Quinn has done several things in the budget, two very large things. One is they basically moved expenses from this year and put them in and called them last year's expenses. Last year, there was $750 million roughly of extra money in last year's budget. They were supposed to, what they said they were going to do with that money when they raised taxes on the families of Illinois, they said they were going to use it to pay down bills. Well, they paid down a few bills, but they didn't really pay down the bills. They used it to keep spending high, and they allocated expenses from this fiscal year into last year and used the money to cover expenses, not to pay down the bills. Fundamentally dishonest, and it makes it look like this year's expenses are lower when they're not. The expenses, and this is going to come home to roost in the 2016 budget that we'll be addressing here in February. The other thing that they did is they did short-term borrowing from special funds in the government. We have special purpose funds, and Governor Quinn set up borrowing, and this borrowing has to be repaid in 18 months. So basically, we're calling borrowing from special purpose funds revenue. We're setting it up as an 18-month debt that has to get repaid. So it creates a booby trap, as has been described by some of your media outlets, for the future budget. And borrowing on a short-term basis, 18-month basis, to cover operating expenses, fundamentally wrong. That's not the way to run the government. That's not the way to run any organization. They've also moved $40 million of expenses into next fiscal year that are really accruing and are obligations from this year. So there's about $1.4 billion among those three categories, $650 million, $750 million, and $40 million, about $1.4 billion that is fundamentally dishonest. And is a massive hole. And that's only the beginning. We are uncovering more, and we'll be meeting with many of you in the coming weeks to discuss about the other challenges and the other way that the budget is fundamentally dishonest and broken. The critical thing I think the voters and your readers and listeners need to understand is our problems have not been created by the tax hike expiring. That's not what is creating our problems. What's creating our problems is years and years of financial mismanagement. That's the core problem. Fundamental dishonesty. For years, Governor Quinn, Governor Blagojevich, they've called borrowing revenue. They have called borrowing revenue. That's not revenue. We have to be honest, and we have to spend what we truly take in as a government long term. That's the only answer to our fiscal problems long term and our financial health. And unless we become a pro-growth, pro-investment, pro-job creation state, we will not have the revenue to have a truly balanced budget. So we need to become pro-growth, and we need to honestly account for the spending in the state, be honest with the voters and the taxpayers. And that will be the fundamental goal that we'll have in our administration, and that's what we'll be meeting with many of you in the coming weeks to outline the detail on. Now, we've given you, I believe, have we given we'll be giving you more charts in the coming weeks as we learn and uncover more of the detail of what's going on in the financial condition of the state. It's very important that the voters understand the situation, and from there, in the future, we'll talk about solutions to fix the fundamental problems. But again, we're going to work on a bipartisan basis. I look forward to working very closely with all the members of the General Assembly. And those are our two priorities here in these couple of days in Springfield. So with that, I'll open it up to a few questions.
Governor, you got a $1.4 billion hole on top of the backlog of bills that's multi-billion. So you're starting off with a $1.4 billion hole you need to fill in the next fiscal year. Is that what you're saying?
Actually, it's much more than $1.4 billion. What we're outlining with you today is the initial take on how big the problem is. There's far more. It's much worse than that. But we just want to make sure that the information is getting out there with the voters and they understand what's going on.
How do you begin to address this? Would you have to raise taxes, massive cuts, a combination of both? Well,
we'll be discussing solutions to fix our problems in the coming weeks and months. Today we're focused on communicating with the voters what our challenges are, where the problems are, where the dishonesty has been, and then from there we'll talk on a bipartisan basis to come up with the solutions.
Well, for the last year you were talking about reducing taxes, growing revenue. You promised, and now are you going to have to go back on that, or how's this going to affect the core of your campaign?
We will be discussing solutions in the coming weeks and months. The number one thing we're going to do, and I discussed it many times in the campaign, we need to become a growth state again. We will never fix our problems. We'll never fund our pensions. We'll never pay for the education that our children deserve. We'll never supply the health care, especially to our neediest citizens, that they deserve if we are not a growth state. Our debt and our deficits have been rising, and since the peak in Illinois of jobs in, I believe it was January of 08, since January of 08, we've lost 130,000 jobs. Since our peak in January of 08. And right now, our job creation is very slow, one of the slowest in America of any state. If we stay on that trajectory, we will never solve our problems. The number one priority has got to be job growth, career growth, to create the revenue and to fix the problems.
But those goals are long-term, and immediately you're facing what you say are dire budget issues. Mm-hmm. So how do you begin to address those in the short term, what you face when you come into office?
Well, again, what we want to do is have a process, and this is about good communication with the voters and the taxpayers. We're begun a process to communicate. Right now, we are discussing the challenges that we face in some more detail, so the voters really understand, because the voters have been misled intentionally by the politicians. Let's stop that. Let's be very honest about what's going on. And when I think the voters and the political leaders here in Springfield come to really appreciate what's going on, I think the solutions will start to become clear. And we'll be discussing those in the near future.
Issue, in Chicago they're going for $13 an hour, and here they're talking about an increase also, maybe not as high, maybe around $10 an hour. How does that fit into your pro-growth agenda, and what are your efforts here? What are your thoughts? Are you trying to stop it?
Okay, thank you for raising that. The minimum wage discussions are very, very important. And it's a major component of what we have to do in dealing with Illinois' competitiveness and the city of Chicago's competitiveness. As I've been clear for a long time, I do support raising the minimum wage, phasing it in over time. But the best way to do that is to combine it with pro-job creation, pro-growth reforms. If we combine that all together in a comprehensive reform package, that helps low-income families, and it helps all families because we can get more jobs, better careers, and our families won't be stuck at just the minimum wage or unemployed hoping to get to the minimum wage, because that's the critical thing. Raising the minimum wage doesn't help somebody who's unemployed. And it doesn't help somebody who is employed today and could get unemployed because of the lack of competitiveness that raising the minimum wage could engender. So raise the minimum wage, but get tort reform, workers' comp reform, and tax overhaul. We do those things all together, we can help all families, and that's really the best answer.
Mr. Rauner, the last time that you were here, you talked about Governor Quinn asked him to not make any more appointments or job hires. This morning, it appears as if he has filed a new chair of the Workers' Compensation Commission, Mr. Ronald Gracia of Chicago. Do you have any comments on that? Is that appropriate of him? Will you keep this guy?
Well, as I can only repeat what I said before, I think it's inappropriate to appoint key positions in the government at the very end of a term when we have new leadership coming in. I think we should let the new administration, let our folks assess the talent. There are some folks in government who we will retain. There are some folks who we won't, and we, I think, should. The voters elected us to do a job, and we've got to assemble a super talented team of people to do that job. So we want the ability to assess everybody, decide who we keep, who gets replaced, and we're going to try to assemble the most talented team, of people that we've ever been assembled anywhere in America to turn a state government around.
Is this an affront by Governor Quinn?
Oh, I don't know about that. Again, I have encouraged the governor not to appoint any positions, not to reclassify people out of one type of job into a different job, often a more protected job, not to make new hires. I think let's leave things where they are. Governor Quinn's on his way out. Let us come in, assess the talent that we have in place, keep those that we think are really going to be pro-reform and pro-growth folks, replace those who aren't, and get strong new leadership. I'll get to you in just a second. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
How do you feel right now about what Mayor Emanuel is doing in the city council with the minimum wage?
Well, again, my recommendation to the mayor is he keeps in mind competitiveness for the city of Chicago. We do not want to increase unemployment in the city of Chicago and end up hurting many of the very families that we all want to help. I would encourage Mayor Emanuel to think about the minimum wage strategically in the same context that I've recommended for years, and that is, let's do it in the context of pro-growth reforms. Let's make Chicago more competitive. Let's help reduce the regulatory burden on businesses in Chicago. Let's do workers' comp reform, tort reform, and a tax reduction on businesses in Chicago, and raise the minimum wage as part of that. That's a win-win across the board.
But if Chicago moves forward today with a minimum wage hike, how does that affect your plans down here for the rest of the state?
Well, again, I've been very clear about what I'm recommending and what we're going to do in Illinois. We will get the minimum wage up in Illinois. We'll do it in the context of pro-growth, pro-job creation reforms.
To piggyback on that, how do you feel about preemption, given your relationships with the business community? Are you in favor of preemption?
Preemption, so I'm sorry.
To prevent other communities from raising their wage.
Oh. I can't really comment on that issue. It's complex. There's different sides to that point. I won't address that right now. The minimum wage is a critical issue. We should take this up. I recommend we do this after our administration comes into office. We have the new General Assembly, and then let's really reform Illinois so we are pro-growth, pro-career development, pro-investment. That's the number one priority. And if we do the minimum wage increase as part of that, all families will benefit.
House Democrats are saying that the new minimum wage proposal might include business tax credits. Is that enough of a pro-business agenda to then pass an increase statewide?
Again, well, I've been very clear. Workers' comp reform, tort reform, and tax overhaul as part of workers' comp is the right way to go. Thanks very much, everybody. Look forward to talking again.
Are you lobbying on this tax?